Intelligence is weird because it means different things to different people and obviously different things in different arenas. You could be really smart at doing the maths that helps us build a bridge and that's super useful. But then maybe in the kitchen, you're poisoning all your family. Or similarly, you might not be good at processing things quickly or at expressing yourself verbally. But then when it's time to build a deck, you can do things that nobody else can. And so it's pretty clear that how we classify intelligence is imperfect and it's a liquid concept. But it does nonetheless describe something that is real, which is a capacity to understand the world and move through it that is not evenly distributed, both across individuals, obviously, people that are smarter at some things than other people, but also within individuals where we have all sorts of different capabilities that are inevitably uneven. And I would risk saying that nobody is going to be in the top 1 percentile for all kinds of intelligence. Could be wrong. I wonder. It'd be nice to be proven wrong, but my instinct and experience is that's the case. And it's probably got a lot to do with how important attention is to intelligence and learning, because if you're giving attention to something, you're learning more about it and you're forming emotional connections to things and making networks in the brain that allow you to navigate across familiar environments. And if you never pay attention to those environments because they're not important to you, then it's hard to be intelligent in them. And consequently, you may have somebody who is adept at explaining some sort of classically considered intelligent field like rocketry or something, but then they can't take the subway without having someone hold their hand through the process, which goes to another element of it, which is there are innate qualities to intelligence, but then also how they're enacted in how we experience each other does have a lot to do with what people have been spending their time on, the environments that they've been in or whatever. And so again, all of this is just to say that it's a murky and not well mapped concept, but it is a really important one because we want to have the people that are the most intelligent at a particular task, doing those tasks if they're important to all of us, because they're more likely to get good results, which could have a big difference. I mean, particularly in fields where leveraging off higher intelligence is going to be really important for everybody's consequences. To give an example where it's not that important, say, for example, if the pasta you had for dinner tonight is 10% less good than it could be, well, I mean, you go on and survive. But if the system that we designed to store and maintain our nuclear weapons is 10% worse than it could be, maybe everybody's dead. But these are just my flippant examples, and don't underestimate the importance of a high quality pasta meal. So with these brackets in mind for what intelligence is and isn't and how we treat it, I want to leap into an exploration of why smart people are for sure dumb as well, and why in many domains we need to be careful with the authority that we give them, both within their domain, but especially beyond their domains. Ultimately, this isn't an attack on smart people. Intelligence is obviously a beautiful characteristic that we all benefit from all the time in ways that we can't appreciate because we're too dumb. But it is instead a kind of a call to put some level of humility as a higher value than I think we currently do collectively. So we have an understanding that we need to have good systems for navigating how to explore the unknown rather than deferring to intelligence as the main trait in understanding reality. Is that dumb? Probably. Is that abstract? Potentially. But I hope you do at least find it interesting and stimulating and that it's a nice journey for you. Quick shout out to me, full credit to the boys, aka me. We're in episode 50, which is a nice little milestone. Thanks so much for being on the journey. As always, thank you so much. If you are one of my Patreon patrons, none of this would exist without you. And if you're considering signing up, head on over to patreon.com/Andrew, where you can have a say in upcoming episodes and some bonus content. In fact, for this episode, I'm going to put out a little review of my 50 episode journey and all the things that I've been really dumb about in that and the mistakes that I've made and things that I've learned from it. It's not so much about the podcasting itself, but about the explicit topics where in my rush to explore an idea or my failing to fully understand the context of an issue, I've been completely wrong in some of the things that I've said, and presumably had you yelling into your phone saying, "No, Chris, you were wrong." And then immediately rushing over to Patreon to subscribe to tell me in the comments specifically where, so that you could listen to my apology episode, which will be out accompanying this one. But that's enough of the ranting. Let's get on to the other side of the music where there'll be even more ranting. Glad to have you here. As a human, it's so hard for me. I mean, because I am a human, I should disclose. It's so hard to gauge what the relative intelligence is of our species and what the value of that is, because it's not nothing. I mean, you can see from the other species that we share the planet with that we are able to do a whole bunch of things that they can't. Obviously, they can do a whole bunch of things that we can't, which may include having the humility and grace to not tinker with everything and break everything in the way that we do to do our learning. But I suspect that that gap is instead because we have a capacity to do things that other species on the planet cannot by quite a margin. And what's more is it's quite easy in many realms to see the differences of intelligence within our species. If you think of people that have sort of severe learning disabilities and are unable to do many of the tasks that you or I can do with ease, and you put them against the people with sort of a classical mix of revered intelligences, say a Rhodes Scholar or something like that, you can clearly see the difference between how they navigate the world. And I always wonder what that difference looks like within other species. Like perhaps if you've got a dumb dog and a smart dog, you can kind of tell the difference between what they're able to do. But even then, it's still within the human metric of what we consider to be valuable forms of intelligence. You know, maybe the dumb dog is really good at some other empathetic or sniffing related skill that we just can't understand. But then once you get to other species like snails or something like that, I mean, I don't even know if I could tell the difference between two snails and their behavior at all, let alone if there's an intelligence gap between them. Maybe there isn't, but I would presume that there must be some sort of genetic and experiential distribution between all kinds of animals and their intelligences. But I frame this idea of animal intelligences and human intelligences and putting them on the same sort of paradigm conceptually as an idea, because what do we do when we conceive of our entire species intelligence relative to a higher form of intelligence? And it's a hard and humbling one to reckon with, because if you were to look at, say, a bonobo, they share like 99% of our DNA or something. The smartest bonobo is not able to compete with an average human at most of the tasks that we need to value to build our society. And what then would that look like if there was some artificial or genetic or alien step shift in intelligence that we encounter that is of a higher order to us? What is the utility difference between being you or being Stephen Hawking in the eyes of something that's one rung up from us? I mean, presumably not significant at all or not of any utility. And so then when we look down the ladder, sorry to pick on bonobos again, because they're great, and look at how bonobos navigate the world, it's immediately obvious that if I were to put a bonobo into an office and say, okay, here's your workstation. I need you to design a poster for the advertising campaign. This is just an entry level job. Here's the brief. Here's the assets. You've just got to knock it up in these dimensions. But bonobo is like entirely incapable of doing that. And similarly, if I were to grab my dog who's sitting on the couch there and hand him a telescope, point it at a star, say, here is a star that is in supernova. I want you to describe it. Here are the distances. Like my dog, wonderful though he is presumably conceptually incapable of accessing basically any steps of the ladder to being able to navigate that task. And so then it follows to reason that there are any number of huge things that we as a species are entirely incapable of, or certainly at the individual level, not able to navigate. And why does this matter? It's not just to give us a kick and say that we're not very good at doing things. To be honest, I find it part of the beauty of life and the wonder of reality that we are on the edge of so many things that are conceptually beyond us, or we require step shifts to be able to engage in, or there are just things that we can't know. That makes reality pretty wonderful. But I bring it up because in the context of today's topic, it's a really important baseline to have to understand that no matter how smart certain individuals are, there will be things that they are utterly incapable of navigating. And furthermore, there will be things that they are bad at navigating relative to you or I. And ultimately, worth saying, there will be things that they are bad at navigating relative to the people that you think of as really dumb. And this is really important framing to keep in mind, in my opinion, in how we navigate the unknown. There's a well-known phenomenon called the authority bias, where we are far more likely to trust, believe, and follow the instructions of people that we perceive to have authority. And intelligence is, in many instances, a major input into how we apportion authority. And to harken back to the intro, like that is good broadly. And we could probably do it a little more, to be honest. I mean, I don't think any of us consider our political classes that make significant decisions over all of our lives to be sufficiently intelligent for the stations that they hold. And nor do I think that we would consider the leading commentariat class to be sufficiently intelligent for the leadership roles that they play in framing the idea space. So intelligence is important to have in the mix, but the risk is once we perceive significant authority to reside within an individual or a body, we give the perspective of that individual or body higher due than perhaps it's earned in the context of whatever it is. And again, that's fine if you're listening to, say, an MIT study has revealed that airplane wings constructed with these dimensions are inferior to ones of these dimensions. I mean, great. I'm going to listen to that more than I'm going to listen to Jason down the pub or whatever. But if MIT says we've got proof that God is real and you can tell because the divine flows through everything and how beautiful a sun rises, well, I'm going to need to read into the detail a little more for myself before deciding that I agree with the masthead that has issued that statement. And this goes to something that is well articulated by Nassim Nicholas Taleb in Black Swan, which is and it's been many years since I read it, so forgive me for not being too hot with the specifics of how he articulates it. But conceptually, it goes to domain specificity. You know, if you're having your pipes changed under your house, listen to a plumber. They know what they're doing much more than you. But if you're dealing with realms that are unknown and for humanity potentially unknowable, then you need to be a little more circumspect in who you listen to and the weight that you give to certain voices. When reflecting upon this topic, the archetypal example that came to mind is there's a Seinfeld episode where Kramer's suing a woman for wearing a bra, distracting him on the street. And in court, his caddy advises him to get the woman to try the bra on and it doesn't fit, so he loses the case. And one of the many jokes there is that he's listening to his caddy for legal advice because he's such a good caddy. And that's obviously an extreme example of this, but it is kind of something that you see all the time. And maybe now that I pointed it out, you'll spot it more and more, where we do the equivalent of taking the caddy's legal advice in how we structure our lives, society, or even just the ideas that we let into our day-to-day idea space. And this is a risk that I think has been amplified in contemporary times, where perhaps in the past, if you're a public intellectual, you might publish a book every few years or even just one and go around talking upon that topic. But because there is such a distribution of content and so much noise in the public sphere and just capacity to quickly publish, it's easy to live our lives while knowing the every thought of what any particular public intellectual thinks about things. And furthermore, they're incentivized to do that to stay relevant in the public sphere, to attract attention, which is the lifeblood of their career and work. And so it's an inevitable consequence that you get really intelligent people like Jordan Peterson, who presumably has a lot to offer in the domains in which he has been spending most of his time. But because of contemporary cultural distribution, et cetera, you have a situation where hundreds of millions of people potentially are listening to him say that eating nothing but red meat is really good, or whatever other number of other things that he says that are way outside of his lane and too complex to know, but presented as though they're knowable. But to move from one end of the God revering spectrum to the other, Richard Dawkins said that after spending days chatting to AI chatbots, he was moved by the machine's philosophical depth and intelligence and declared, "You may not know that you're conscious, but you bloody well are." And I think that it's funny that a guy who's made his whole career saying how there's no God is seeing the spark of some ill-defined and unknowable life and value and worth in large language models. And you know what? The thing is, they could both be right. It could be really important for us to only eat beef all day long. And it could be really important for us to realize that the chatbots have a consciousness and a sentient. But apart from personally suggesting that that's not the case, the point is that we don't know. And if you give undue weight to the voices of experts, you can find yourself in trouble quickly, particularly with important matters where you sort of desperately do turn to expertise because you don't know about something. And I've picked hyperbole examples that, are probably not from messages or individuals that will strongly resonate with you as something you want to take on board in your own life. But I encourage you to just take a moment and think about who are the people that you listen to for advice and who are the public figures that you think are really intelligent, and in what esteem do you hold their opinions when they're outside of the realms in which you think that they're good at doing what they do. Because while on balance, I think it is really good that we do get to find out that certain public individuals that are revered for their position and depth of work on a particular matter also happen to think that aliens are real and they exist, and their proof is that yeast makes bread rise, or whatever kooky thing you might find. I think on balance, it's good. And also, even when it's not so extreme, I like to hear what intellectual thinks about a new topic that they don't know about because they're intelligent at navigating the world and sharing those things. The risk is when that falls into giving it an authority of truth. And the greater risk is when that falls into pushing your own thoughts or pushing other people or other perspectives outside of the arena of the discussion of whatever it might be. And this is a non-trivial problem. It's not just a case of the postman's been listening to a lifestyle guru and now thinks that he needs to wear tape on his mouth to sleep well and raise his testosterone levels or whatever. Like it's not just the fringe stuff at the margin. It is the actual really important stuff at the core of our society where we risk tipping the scales too much in favor of the balance of assuming that intelligent people, because of their relative intelligence, are capable of navigating things for us in a superior way. And I think that this is true, like if you cast your eyes across the landscape of anything that's sort of really important at the moment. I've talked a little bit about the Russia-Ukraine war in past episodes and what I consider to be the folly in the nature of how that's being pursued in terms of negative outcomes for the people that are being killed constantly through it and the threats to the architecture of global security, which is degrading anyway. But to pick one that's perhaps less contested, I think we all agree now that the Vietnam War and the escalation of the US involvement in fighting against the Northern Vietnamese army and trying to suppress the Viet Cong was a folly. It was not a good idea. It was done on terms that were not correctly understood, for stakes that were not correctly understood, with methods that were not correctly understood, and therefore was ineffective in achieving its outcomes from an American perspective. But the little externality there is the millions of dead Vietnamese people and tens of thousands of dead Americans. And so, in this sort of starker example, you could see scaffolded bad logic, but that bad logic was not at the time considered to be the stupid folly by the people who were in charge that it is now. It's not just a cynical thing where the people in charge don't care and they're not aware and they just happen to send off boys to die, et cetera, as long as they're making money. I mean, there is an element of that for sure. But an interesting thing is you could look back and see the thoughts of the people that were the leaders at the time of what was occurring. And I want to talk about one guy in particular, Robert McNamara, who was a Secretary of State of the US and a major proponent of escalation in the US war. And he was no schlub. He was a mighty intellect who, for some context, he became general manager of Ford Motor Company when he was 33 years old. And he was seen as brilliant. He wasn't just radically pursuing power in the way that you sort of cynically might think of people who inhabit those senior political offices often. He was seen as having superior intelligence, an earnest disposition. And from his time at Ford onwards, he had a reputation for solving problems because he would always seek to get better information and improve systems to achieve better outcomes. And so, therefore, it makes sense that if you're in those offices or if you work adjacent to him and you're trying to understand the problems of the state at the time, you would listen to this guy and you would look at the charts that he presents and you would listen to his reasoning and potentially be swayed more easily than you would by someone who didn't have any of the intellectual heft and structured thinking in putting forward what it is that they were. But the thing with a complex world is you only need to be missing one key element in your metrics of how you construct models, et cetera, for everything that you're doing to be completely wrong. And if everything you're doing is completely wrong and you're driving a huge vehicle at great speed, well, you could be going in the wrong direction and smash through everything. And that's kind of what we see when we have great intellectuals at the head of things in realms where they're not constantly able to calibrate against the information of reality. And so in the Vietnam War context, Robert McNamara reasoned that if they could just use systems of statistical analysis to provide better measurements for troops' effectiveness within the war, that would allow for a kind of better decision-making in how they use their troops to prosecute the war, and that with these metrics of effectiveness, they should therefore be winning the war. What's missing in this instance is that the very premise of what the war is being fought over and what the outcomes that they're hoping to achieve were completely misunderstood. And you get the situation where no matter what they do in terms of the numbers of people that they kill and land they destroy, they're not actually getting any closer to winning people over. Hard to believe. And I guess we laugh now because it's so stupid, but we shouldn't, because for the bulk of my life, America and Australia, et cetera, were in Afghanistan doing kind of exactly the same thing, much to the same result. And actually, I'll put up on my Instagram, there's an image of a great chart that a guy, I think at the CIA, came up with for understanding the relationships between different organizations in Afghanistan so that you could look at it and understand what was occurring. And it is just the most insanely unnavigable brain spaghetti that you'll ever see. And it's just astonishing to see that this is what top level people are engaging with in how they're trying to understand reality, when there are core truths on the ground in this particular instance and in many others that are not being represented and are inescapable, which is maybe you can't kill your way into every possible achievable outcome. And Robert McNamara, being a very impressive Secretary of State in the US and overseeing disastrous consequences in the prosecution of the Vietnam War, is just one of a million examples that you could find today as you look around at every scale of getting the mix not quite right in how we revere intelligence and how we have the hubris to think that we collectively can understand things. And this is so important at the moment, where arguably our capacity to shape reality is higher than it's ever been and only increasing. And the importance of getting things right at the margins is of higher stakes because of the higher consequences that power wields. And I spoke about this in last week's episode about, are we ready for AI? It's so important not to leave the discourse to be shaped by the same types of people who, in this instance, I mean, tech CEOs and other sort of scientific based thought leaders, because they don't know what's going to occur and they don't know what the impacts will be and they don't know what the opportunities are. They are speculating, and they are one type of people to be doing all that speculating and considering and offering solutions and ideas. But what makes our species good is we do have such a distribution of styles of thinking and ways of navigating the world, and seemingly different distribution of motivations and values as well, that it really is the collective input in how we understand frontier issues that makes us more robust. Because the risk in navigating any of the current problems, whether it be decline of the US and deglobalization and all the conflicts that are emerging, or how we control our nuclear stocks, or how we roll out artificial intelligence, or how we navigate to a post-ownership or post-scarcity world, if those things are indeed on the horizons, or even cultural issues like the seesawing swing of the disillusion of traditional values and their reintroduction, the declining birth rate, declining sexual participation, changing of our bodies, changing of our biochemistry, et cetera, et cetera. These things can't best be navigated by just one individual or just one cohort or just one institution, because of their unknowability in advance and because of their complexity in inaction and potentially their unknowability at all. And so this is why you have classical liberals agitating values of the right to participation in the civic discourse and the right to participation in lifestyle of your choosing and freedom of exchange of ideas and speech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those things, they're perhaps more important than they have been in the past, precisely because of the high stakes. And also, I think, because of the concentration, which is nothing new. I mean, that concentration has existed historically, of course, for obvious reasons. But there's kind of I would say, a cancer in the hive in how we have algorithmic information distributed and how we have ownership concentrated. And I couldn't speak to how new it is, but inadequate sites of reflection and contemplation, or at least controlled and tipped ones. Again, that may not be new. I'm just speculating. But these are more important than ever because the consequences are so high of the frontiers that we're on. And all things going well, those consequences are not going to diminish in scale as we continue to get more powerful and have more capacity to collectively navigate reality, which is ultimately what intelligence is, I think, usefully measured for. There's no utility being in a coma and just having really interesting dreams. I mean, maybe there's utility to the individual, but in terms of how we all live and help each other and construct our own lives, it is the capacity to understand the reality we're living in and navigate it well and optimize certain things in better ways and conceive of new things to move towards, et cetera, that is the lifeblood magic of intelligence that makes it such an important thing for us to correctly place in our hierarchy of how we apportion resources, attention, and value. So high, but not too high, I guess, is the headline. And to round us out, I mean, I said I could come up with a million examples, but I feel like I owe it to myself to talk about who is clearly one of the smartest people and best operators on the planet at the moment, Elon Musk. I know he's very controversial and deeply unlikable for many obvious reasons, but I don't think that anyone who honestly looks at him and is appraising the things that he's done could call him anything but extremely intelligent. And he's kind of like a comic book villain example in this instance, because he is motivated in many of his works by his own word, and I think fair to say deeds as well, as wanting to take consciousness into the galaxy beyond our own planet, because it is certainly the case that at some point life on this planet will become uninhabitable. at least certainly the case if our understanding of certain baseline realities is correct, i.e. we're not living in a simulation or we're not children of God on a protected marble, et cetera, et cetera. Both things that could be true, absolutely. But in the event that they aren't, at some point, the sun will explode or something will collide with the planet or the magnetic poles will reverse or whatever it is. Something will make life uninhabitable here. So we need to get off the planet to somewhere else. And so as such, that leads him to prioritize the resources that he acquires. And he's very good at acquiring resources and leveraging them to acquire more resources, to getting life off the planet and onto Mars. And then, who knows how broad his vision extends. I would imagine very broad given the ambition that he has. And to achieve this, you have to expend a lot of energy and I guess break a lot of eggs to make that omelet. And we're breaking them in realms that we don't know what the consequences of those eggshells will be. It's a bad metaphor, but stick with me. Just to pick one small example in the scale of all of these things and what could happen. Currently, we've gone from having one satellite in space when the Russians launched Sputnik in the 50s to currently having, what do you think? Have you looked up at the night sky lately? Because I remember 15 years ago, I'd look at the sky and be like, oh, wow, look, there's a satellite. That must be the International Space Station. You could track it across the sky and then, wouldn't see another one for a while or wouldn't see any other satellites. Now you look at the sky, it's like, boop, 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 because there are 14,500 satellites up there at the moment. And most of them are in low Earth orbit and will be only up there for about 5 years or something before crashing down. And we're continuously sending up more and more and more and more. And the consequences of that, okay, like people worry about space junk. I think there's a lot of space up there. That's probably not the biggest problem, but there are atmospheric risks I've been reading about because of the composition of these satellites and when they re-enter and how all of the aluminium, I think in particular, is burnt up that we don't know about yet and what the impacts of that could be. Anyway, it's just one small thing, but the ozone and the atmosphere are extremely important to us. And if our race to get 1 trillion things into space compromises that critically, well, I think we would look back and say, what the fuck were we doing? This is a disaster. If we were all drinking if we only had one lake in our village and we were all drinking from that lake, and one day someone said, you know what, I could open this really cool toy manufactory and it's going to be great and we're going to have heaps of toys all the time. And by the way, I think toys are the most important thing for our species because of whatever cultural religion at the time. Okay, yeah, start it up, get it going. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, it dumps heaps of industrial waste and quite a lot of mercury into the lake. And that lake that we all drink from, there's a small chance that we'll never be able to drink from it again and it will kill us all. I think in this instance, we'd say, well, even though toys are really culturally important to us, I think we need to reorient our values hierarchy because being able to live is also really important to us. But we're not really having those sorts of conversations or understanding in our race to get things done at the moment, whether it's on the space frontier or the AI frontier or the robotics or whatever it might be. And I think of this stuff as an example of kind of a classic illustration of how extremely smart people are extremely dumb, because the premise of Elon Musk's race to get us all into space is that for sure one day the sun will explode and kill us all. But that timeline, it's not even in the millions of years. Our sun will undergo a dramatic death in about 5 billion years when it runs out of hydrogen fuel. 5 billion years. We've been around as a sentient language-using species for tens of thousands of years. Again, if the collective knowledge on this is correct. And so the idea, I mean, if you were to draw out in dots, 1 dot per year, the difference between the entire history of the species, or indeed the entire history of every single species of life on this planet against 5 billion years, you would think, well, we've probably got a minute. We don't need to make life interplanetary in my own lifetime for the species to be okay. And yet that is the premise, which I think is deeply flawed, upon which someone who many consider to be one of the smartest people in the world is leveraging more resources than any individual has potentially ever leveraged to achieve their goals. And so this stuff isn't of no consequence. It is of big consequence. And we really need to have lots of voices and ideas and many hands on the controls. And that's kind of the founding principles of lots of movements in humanity, but certainly contemporary ideas of liberal democracy, which I would say we don't live in at all and haven't realized and have stopped working towards realizing and have drifted very, very far away from even the peak forms of those that we had. So it's instead into your ears that I plug this information so you can go out into your own life and reflect upon it, because smart people are dumb too. And even the smartest of us is going to be really dumb compared to any next level of intelligence. And the way that we offset that is by appropriately metering where we do give domain expertise and authority to those who have intelligence and capacity, or at least having systems that allow those people to find and inhabit those positions, and in not handing over all the tools in our knowable realms to the smartest person in the room, because chances are they may be just as bad as anyone randomly allocated. But even worse, they may not have the capacity to realize that because they are smarter than everyone else in the room and are used to being better at doing things. So, just some thoughts. As always, for my patrons, keep an eye out for the episode examining all the things that I think I've gotten critically wrong in the first 50 episodes. And thank you for listening to this, or indeed any of the episodes. It's a fun endeavor, and I hope it's adding utility to your life in even a small way. Certainly a way that's commensurate with the 20 minutes that each episode asks of you. I mean, if you compare that to an episode of How I Met Your Mother, I mean, Jesus Christ, we're doing the Lord's work in here. And if we look at how commensurately remunerated I am relative to those guys, well, I mean, you've got to think maybe everyone is dumb after all. Thanks for listening. Shout out to the patrons. See you next time.